Hi everybody, it's Kendra here. Today I'm going to be taking you through as I dye some roving and also going to be sharing some tips to keeping things nice and light and fluffy. So first up, I am going to be soaking my roving in citric acid. So one of the things we want to avoid is a sudden change in temperature. So I don't want to take my room temperature roving and put it in some boiling hot water. However, I do want my citric acid to be fully dissolved in the water. So typically what I do is add a couple tablespoons of citric acid into my container that I'm going to be soaking it in. Then I add hot water until it's fully dissolved, and then I add cold to make it more lukewarm. And then I'm going to add my roving and put it on top. So this is actually a superwash wool, which means that I don't really have to worry about felting. However, I want to kind of give you the tips as if it were non-superwash. And so because of that, I want to be really careful to avoid those sudden shifts. And I also, when I put it into my water, I'm just going to let it sit and slowly absorb the water and then just gently press it down. You don't want to be wringing it in or running the water right on top. You're just trying to treat the roving as absolutely gently as you can. Some wool actually seems to like repel the water, and that's just based off of the oils that are in the sheep, like naturally occurring lanolin. So you just want to give it time. Some take longer than others to become fully saturated. You can see this pretty well. It does absorb the wool, or it does absorb the water, but I'm just going to let it sit and just gently be pressing these areas into the water. So it's been soaking and I'm getting ready to transfer it over to my pan here. I am going to be baking this one, which means I'm going to be adding the dye and then heat setting it in the oven. I'm just using one of these reusable, well, I think they're called disposable trays, tin foil, and mine actually has some holes in it, I think just from the citric acid kind of wearing it down. So I just lined it with tin foil. We're just making things work here today. So as I transfer the roving, I just want to make sure to support it as I transfer it. So I'm going to gather it up, and I'm just going to make sure that I'm not holding it by like one piece. I want to take it all and move it over, and I'm not going to wring it out. Some people, or for some dyes, I will like gently squeeze some of the excess out, but I'm going to pretty much transfer what I have here and put it over in the pan. So it's been transferred in, and you can see I did arrange it in a bit of a spiral pattern. Now let me just say, if you have a good pan, then it does make sense to just soak it in there so you don't have to do the transferring step. I'm just showing you my process working with what I have, and really until I'm able to like upgrade equipment, this is what I have found to be the best plan, because this pan, whatever this is, this tinfoil pan does leak. So when I apply the dye, I want to be really careful to make sure that it's being absorbed by the roving and not just leaking through the pan. Obviously, you can arrange the dye however you want, and it really is best to arrange it before it even gets wet. You could do the circle, you could do like a snake shape, whatever you want to do. For this one, I'm doing the circle, and I'm now going to put this baby away so she's not around the dye and get mixing. So I have just mixed up my colors. I did do a dip test here, although it's hard to see because it has been sitting for a minute. So I went with the very diluted gray. I have a plum color here, and then this is actually like a deep orange burnt kind of color. It's showing up very pink there. It's just the way that it's absorbed now. But these are the three colors I'm going to be using on this skein, and I'm going to start just layering on my dyes. And I'm going to start lightest to darkest, pouring, and then using my gloves, I'm just going to gently press it in. We're not wringing it, we're just making sure that the dye will saturate all the way throughout each part of the roving. So not only do we want to avoid temperature change, we want to avoid excessive agitation, especially while wet or hot. So here we have no heat, but it is wet, and so I just again want to avoid any amount of agitation while still making sure that my dye is getting all the way through the layers. So the reason why I am kind of pushing or pressing it in is just because often if you just pour it on top, the underlayer is basically completely undyed. Now, another option that I've seen people do is once you've done dyeing the top, flip it over and check the bottom. And I mean, I've done things like that before too, but by kind of separating the layers and just making sure the dye is penetrating, it will help to give you that saturation. So you can see I've added quite a lot of extra dye. I am going to put it in the oven now and let it start to get up to temperature. I do like to put it in at 300 and I'll just check it, and I want to see this liquid around the edges start to run clear. That's what I'm looking for, and that means that all that color is being absorbed by the wool. So I am just going to put it in, and once it gets hot, it's important to not touch it. I have layered on dyes after it's been hot, but you need to be very careful that you're not disturbing the fibers, because that is part of what can cause felting. So it's about an hour later. My yarn has, or my fiber has been heating the whole time, and I'm looking, a lot of that liquid is gone, which is fine. And if I poke it very, very gently, again, I want no agitation, it is clear. So actually right now, I'm going to just turn my oven off. So I am just going to let it cool in the oven. I'm not going to move it or bump it or agitate it at all. Now sometimes I do need the oven in between, so I will take it out and just leave it on the top of my stove top to let it cool. But the most important thing is don't poke it, don't move it, don't rinse it while it's hot. And the less you do so, the more fluffy and the softer your fiber will be. So now that this has fully cooled, I'm going to wash it, and my new trick for washing fiber is to place it inside a large mesh laundry bag. These are inexpensive and you can get them, I think this one's from Walmart, but I just put my fiber in the bag and then submerge it in the water, and this really helps to keep all of the fiber together and not just have little pieces come off or clog the drain or whatever else. So I just, again, still want to be gentle, even though now we have removed the heat. It is still wet, so we still want to avoid agitation. We're going to gently place it in, and then I've already prepared my soaking tub here with some dish soap. And I do one dish soap, I do one with the soap, and then I rinse it out. But we're not going to be, again, not agitating, especially with the soap. I think it's more at risk of being felted. So we are just going to fill the bag, rest it on top, let it soak it up. And I usually let it sit for like 10 minutes or so to see if any dye leaches out. If there is a lot of color bleeding, first of all, it means you probably had too much dye to start with. However, it means you are going to need more rinsing. So every single rinse, you need to be very careful not to be moving it around too much. So it's still basically in the same coil shape, and I'm going to transfer it over to the sink. You don't want the water to be hot, and I don't want to be moving it around, just letting it kind of soak in and soak, and I'm going to leave it for a while to make sure that there's no dye that needs to come out. So I did get a little bit interrupted, but basically I want to support my fiber when it's coming out of the bag, and I just lay it to dry or hang it gently. Like, you don't want it pulling at one spot. And I think the most important thing is to not wring it. You don't want to grab it and squeeze it or anything like that. The most that I do is like just gently kind of press on it. And if you think about wanting to have fluffy fiber, the more you squeeze, the more you're compressing all those fibers together. So as it dries, it will just be tighter. So this here is partially dry, it's still damp, but you can see it's already getting fluffy again. And I'm just going to leave it be while it dries, and we will take a look at the finished result. So this is the final fiber. You can see it does have some fuzzing around the edges, and that's just from being the VFL. If I compare the same process with like a comb top or a merino, it really does change the look, just because that's what the fiber content is. You can see within each strand it's very light and fluffy, nothing's held together, and it's just really nice and ready to be spun up. So I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below and I will do my best to answer. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Bye!